Analysis of Futility by Wilfred Owen for the AQA GCSE Literature exam. Futility. Move him into the sun. Gently its touch awoke him once at home, whispering of fields unsown. Always it awoke him, even in France, until this morning and this snow. If anything might rise him now, the kind old sun will know. Think how it wakes the seeds, woke once the clays of a cold star. Are limbs so dear achieved, are sides full nerved, still warm, too hard to stir? Was it for this the clay grew tall? Oh, what made fatuous sunbeams toil to break earth's sleep at all? Okay, so starting with the subject, we will be going through the FLIRTS analysis, form, language, imagery, rhythm, rhyme, tone, and here we are at subject, working out what the poem is about and then fitting in the rest of our analysis to that particular subject matter. The poem, it's short, but don't make the mistake that it's a simple poem. It's not. It's very complex poem. And it's exploring, it's describing a soldier who has died in the First World War. Wilfred Owen, as you can see in your anthology, 1893 to 1918, he was a First World War poet. He died in the First World War. He was shot in a week before Armistice Sunday, so he was a bit unfortunate in that. So he saw the full expanse of the Great War, as it were. So poets like Rupert Brooke, who wrote The Soldier and wrote quite a positive, patriotic reflection on the war. If I should die, think only this of me, that there is some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. He was very patriotic in his war poetries, but he died very early on in the war, and whereas Wilfred Owen saw the war in all its gruesome glory, so to speak. And in this poem, he is describing the death of a soldier, but it's not just about that. It's exploring the meaning of existence, which is quite a deep and philosophical poem, and it's describing the pointlessness of war and perhaps the pointlessness of life itself. Futility. Futility is a noun. It means pointlessness, not having meaning. And fatuous, again, which is used in the poem as well. Again, pointlessness, silly, not having not having a purpose as such. And futile is the adjective to describe something as being meaningless, pointless. Now the form, I've included the whole poem here because I think it's important for us to look at the poem as a whole. You may have noticed it's 14 lines, and therefore it has the sonnet form in terms of its structure. Okay, so it's 14 lines. You should be familiar with sonnets as a form. Those of you that have studied Romeo and Juliet in year 9, you'll be aware of sonnets. The sonnet is a prologue, the sonnet when Romeo and Juliet meet for the first time. There are 2 stanzas, however. There's 2 7-line stanzas, and they have a changing focus. The poem can also be considered, in terms of form, as an elegy, and I'll talk to you about what an elegy is in a moment. So there are 2 forms that we could have a look at this poem, in terms of structure and form. We can look at this poem as a sonnet. We can also look at it as an elegy. So the sonnet structure. Now this could be a response to the patriotic nature of some of the war poetry. I was referring to Wilfred Owen. I am referring to Wilfred Owen now, but I was referring to Rupert Brooke earlier and his poem The Soldier. And now that is written in the form of a sonnet because it was a dedication. It was a love poem, so to speak, to his country, to England. And possibly Wilfred Owen is responding to this rather than it being a love poem, Owen is using this poem to reflect on what he sees as the futility of conflict and life. Possibly you could argue that it does fall into that dedication bracket, in terms of it refers to a particular soldier, and this might be Owen's way of dedicating a poem to this person who has lost their life. These stanzas, they change in focus. The first stanza is about the dying or the dead soldier. It's not quite clear whether it's not explicit whether the soldier is dying or dead, or already dead, so to speak. But in that stanza anyway. But that first stanza is describing that moment. The second stanza, it shifts to a wider focus, a more grander focus, a more deep and complex musings, contemplation on the universe, even, and the philosophy of life. It's quite an existential poem. In other words, it's questioning our existence. Now, the elegy, which I talked about, is another poetic form, and they would be composed as almost like funeral songs. They would be a lament for the dead, so they would be mournful, somber poems written about someone who has died. Now, using this as a form, Owen is reflecting on the life of the soldier in the first instance, but also the passing of life in general. So language. Now you've got the title, Futility, and then I've picked out some words. Awoke, woke, rouse, woke, sleep. That should be woke. The format of the PowerPoint has changed that, put that on 2 lines, but that's the repetition of woke, and then there's awoke and rouse and sleep. Right, the language is simple and it's blunt. We're seeing a lot of these in the poems that we've looked at. This poem, by the way, is the first poem in the Literary Heritage collection. So it's an older poem. It's an established poem. It's the contemporary poetry is of the last 10 years. Normally in literary heritage poetry or older poetry, we see more of a poetic kind of a more flowery, floral kind of language, and by floral I mean kind of metaphoric, image rich and so forth, more a romanticized and idealized language. This, however, is simple and blunt. And then with that second bullet point on the left hand side, we can see there's repeated references to being awake and therefore consciousness. So the language, the blunt language, is clear in the title, Futility. Okay, he's not pulling his punches. He is describing what he sees as the pointlessness of war and of life itself. The voice, the speaker in the poem is not emotive. In fact, they're far removed from their emotions. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of emotion about the passing of this soldier. I mean, yes, the poem is mournful and somber, yet there's not really a sense that the speaker is that emotive, really. It's describing it's removing himself from the emotions, describing the dying soldier, and really thinking more about life itself, the existence. The war has hardened the speaker. This is what I think, anyway, that the speaker has been hardened by the war. Death has become an everyday part of life for the speaker, and so they are unable to be emotive at this moment. And instead of mourning the loss of the soldier, they reflect on the futility of war and of life. The repetition of woke and its variants, awake, woke, and of course we have sleep and so forth, emphasize this contemplation of consciousness that defines our existence. By being conscious, we are aware that we are alive, as René Descartes succinctly put it, I think, therefore I am. This idea of being awake is really the only, and consciousness is the only thing we have that lets us know we are alive. So the imagery, I've given you 4 quotations there. The sun throughout the poem is a central image. It's described, or it's presented, should I say, in both stanzas in a different way, and this shows a contrast in the poem. Now I've put cold star down. I'm going to talk about this. It could describe the sun and therefore be an oxymoron, cold star, that you know, of course it's not cold, it provides all our heat, it's very, 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 very hot. So it's oxymoron is a linguistic phrase that contradicts itself. Cold star, love, hate, loving hate, as in Romeo and Juliet, quality kebabs. You know, these are linguistic phrases that contradict themselves. Or cold star, which I actually think it means, it is referring to the earth. So in the first stanza, the sun is described as a nurturing, life-giving force. It's a comforting presence in that first stanza, and it's shown that it will have the ability to revive soldiers from their unconsciousness, from their sleep, and from and possibly from their death. There's almost this kind of sense of desperation in the men that they need to do anything to try and keep this soldier alive, or to revive him from dying. The sun is personified, kind old sun, and its touch will provide comfort, will provide warmth. You know, a physical touch will provide comfort for the soldier. And as I've said, you know, the soldiers are perhaps clutching at straws here. They're desperate to try and keep this soldier alive, their comrade alive, and they are looking for anything in order to revive him. The second stanza describes the sun as being fatuous. Okay, you know. Oh, what made fatuous sunbeams so. You know, fatuous is a simile for futile. You know, this is absolutely pointless, and you know, no matter how you know, fatuous, silly, pointless, the speakers come to a realization that the sun cannot restore life. It will not give life back to this soldier. But then what is fatuous? The speaker is questioning why it should create life at all. You know, the sun is the life-giving force. For life to exist on this planet, it needs food and water, and that's all. Excuse me, it needs sunlight and water, and that is all. That's all we need to exist. And the sunlight and water creates the plants and the vegetation. The vegetation feeds the other animals that we live off and creates food. But initially, all life starts with those two things, sun and water. And the speaker questions why it should give life at all if life is only going to end. Now, with these two readings of the Cold Star, you may have been taught, or you may be reading on some of the revision websites, and so that the Cold Star is referring to the sun, and therefore it's an oxymoron. The sun is being referred to as being without emotion. Also, in astronomical terms, apparently the sun comparatively is cold compared to other stars that we have. So, you know, Wilfred Owen may have had that astronomical knowledge and knows that the sun, in relation to other stars in the universe, in the galaxy, is relatively cold. However, I don't think that. I think that the Cold Star, I think that Wilfred Owen is actually got a bit confused and is referring to the Earth as the Cold Star. It's obviously that the Earth is not a star. The sun is a star and the Earth is a planet. However, look at the line in context. Think how it wakes the seeds. That's what it's talking about. It's, the sun is the it. Think how the sun wakes the seeds. Woke once the clays of a cold star. And I think clays is the clue there, that it is referring to the earth. The clays of a cold star. And I think by using it as by calling it a star, either he's just got it wrong and is referring to the earth as a star. It could also be fitting to his rhyming pattern, which I will talk about later. Also, it could mean, I've forgotten what I was going to say. The cold star. So yes, the star fitting in with his rhyme pattern, and it's cold. Oh yes, it is a star in the sense that it is a celestial object. In other words, it's an object in the sky. So it shares it shares its properties in that sense. So it's a celestial object. And the earth, of course, is given life by the sun. Woke once the clays of a cold star. And of course, there is the biblical reference there of clays, that man was made of clay. You know, and well, it's biblical, and also in other classical mythology as well. In that man is shaped from clay, the clays of the earth. Adam was made from the dust of the earth, so to speak. So this idea of life, the earth, clay, etc. I think cold star refers to the earth. So rhythm and rhyme. We have the first two lines there. Move him into the sun, gently its touch awoke him once. That's to show you the rhythm. And then we have France once, star, stir, snow, no, tall, all, to show you rhyme. Now there's no regular meter. Now remember what I've said in previous videos, meter describes the rhythm of the poem. If you look, move him into the sun, gently its touch awoke him once, they're not the same length in lines in terms of their syllables. Now you should be aware of a sonnet form having iambic pentameter, meaning that sonnets, each line is made up of pentameter, means 5, and 5 poetic feet, and the iamb is the poetic foot in that case, which means that it has 2 syllables. So it's 5 lots of 2, meaning 10 syllables, with every other syllable being stressed. That's what iambic pentameter tells us. You should be aware roughly of iambic pentameter. That's of the sonnet form. Well, this doesn't have an iambic pentameter, so it doesn't fit in with that sonnet form. Neither does it fit in with the regular meter of an elegy, which is a hexameter. I'm not too sure of the foot, but it's hexameter. So what you need to get across is that it doesn't have the regular meter of either of the sonnet forms that it's supposed to be. Now with the rhyme, we see half rhymes and full rhymes. Now full rhymes like snow and no, tall and all, in fact they are the only instances of full rhymes in the poem. And then France and once, star and stir, we refer to half rhymes when they kind of sound like each other. You might have I rhymes as well, which is a form of half rhyme. In other words, when words look like each other, like good and food. If you look at the words good and food, they look the same with the double O's and of course the double OD, but they don't sound the same. So there's use of half rhymes and use of full rhymes. So the poem is not written in a rhythmic meter consistent with sonnets or elegy, so it's not fitting in with either of the poetic forms that it falls under. Now, by deviating from this structure, this rhythm, this form, and through the more prominent use of half rhymes. Okay, there are more half rhymes in the poem than there are full rhymes. Owen, the poet, is showing us that life does not lack, does not have a formal structure. We don't have these kind of patterns in our lives. we might have our routines, but those routines can be wiped out with our life. We don't know what's going to happen from day to day, and he rather cheerfully kind of just shows us how it's pointless to try and find order in life. There's no real point in having a routine. Just try and make the most of what you've got, I suppose. Now, tone. I've used the last 3 lines as an example for the tone. I get a sense of frustration, through those questions. There is a somber, mournful tone which reflects the futility that Owen is describing, and also it reflects the fact that the poem is an elegy. So these closing lines, they kind of encapsulate the tone of the poem as a whole. Okay, so these lines sum it up, so to speak. The voice is aware that it is futile, it's pointless in believing that sun will restore life, and it's quite clear through those questions, so that there is a sense of frustration that life is given only to be taken away. The title, Futility, it reflects the speaker's feelings, the poet's feelings, not only about war and conflict, but about life itself. As I said, the poem is existential, meaning that it is focused on the nature of existence, and the speaker is questioning our existence, the existence of life in general, and argues that life is pointless, rather cheerfully. And with the final thing, I'd just like to say in that the tone is somber, it is mournful, it is funereal, and this is indicative of the elegiac form. In other words, it is an elegy. This is a lament for the passing of life.